Good evening, Dom. What I'm about to share is a memory that has disturbed me since childhood. I was about 7 or 8 years old. Usually my mom would take my brother and me trick-or-treating, but that particular year after school she dropped me off at my friend Luke's house, where he, our friend Jacob, and I were going to go together. Jacob and Luke were a year older than me. We met while I was playing with my brother on the street. Jacob and Luke lived on the same street as I did. Luke's upbringing was kind of strange, something I never quite understood. His sister was about 20 years old, so there was a big age difference between them. It seemed like she was always taking care of him when I was there. The house always smelled like cats, and his sister always had some different guy around. She was never very friendly to me, like she never greeted me or said hi, nothing. Luke's dad wasn't around, and his mom, from what I understood, worked out of town. I think I saw his mom just a few times. The truth is, we never had enough contact for me to understand that whole situation better. Anyway, my mom dropped me off at Luke's house, expecting that his mom would take us trick-or-treating. After saying goodbye, I went inside, and Jacob was already there. We all brought large pillowcases to fill with candy. That's when I realized that neither Luke's mom nor his sister were going to join us. I was young, so I felt a bit uneasy knowing that Jacob and Luke would be the ones leading us. But at the same time, I was excited about the freedom. I knew, in fact, my mom wouldn't be too happy to know we were going out without any adults around. So eventually we set off through the neighborhood, walking and knocking on doors. A lot of people asked if we were alone or where our parents were, and Jacob always gave the same lie. His mom is up ahead with his sister. It worked every time. It was a Friday, so we started trick-or-treating only late in the afternoon, but since there was no school the next day, we planned to keep going until we completely filled our pillowcases. After a few hours, we took a break and went back to Luke's house, where he made a bunch of frozen pizzas. At the time, I was super envious of the freedom he seemed to have at home, with no parents caring about what he did, but today, looking back, I feel very lucky to have grown up with stricter parents. After hanging out at his place for about an hour, watching Halloween specials on Nickelodeon while eating pizza and candy, Jacob's mum came to pick him up. But Luke and I still wanted more, so we decided to head out again for a second round of trick-or-treating. It was already dark, and it must have been later in the evening. By now, there were hardly any more people trick-or-treating. We decided to explore some streets we hadn't gone to yet, which took us a bit farther from Luke's house. We found a new street and continued knocking on doors. Some houses weren't answering anymore, and at the ones that did, most people commented about us being alone or how it was getting late. We noticed a man pushing a stroller a few houses behind us. He was walking slowly in our direction, probably a father taking his young child out to trick-or-treat. We kept going, house to house, until the man with the stroller got closer. He started shushing and humming softly. When he finally caught up with us, he said, "How's the candy haul going, boys?" We both answered good at the same time. He then said, "It's getting late, I'm heading home, I can give you what's left of my candy." Luke and I exchanged looks, surprised, as if we had won the lottery. Luke asked what kind of candy he had, and the man replied, "A bunch of different things." He explained that he hadn't handed out much because he wanted to take his daughter for a walk on Halloween. There was a bag hanging from one of the stroller's handles full of candy. The stroller was completely covered by a foldable top, so we couldn't see his daughter. He said she was asleep and didn't want to wake her, but pointed ahead and said his house was just up there. So we started following him as he pushed the stroller, now walking a little faster. As we walked, I noticed there was hardly anyone else on the street, even though it was a Friday night. It felt like a quieter part of the neighborhood. The man made small talk with us, asking questions like which part of the neighborhood we were from, where we went to school, basic stuff. I let Luke answer most of it since he was only a year older than me. At that age, I thought he should take the lead. Several times as we walked, the man would lean into the stroller and speak sweetly to his daughter. Then he'd turn back and smile at us. We finally arrived at his house. He guided the stroller up the driveway and opened the door. He went in first with the stroller and his daughter, then invited us in. Luke went ahead, and I followed. I was the one who asked, "Can we leave the door open?" The man paused for a moment before saying, "Yes, of course." He said he'd be right back with the candy bags. He pushed the stroller into the middle of the room, just a few meters from where we stood. I nudged Luke because I was starting to feel uncomfortable. I whispered, "Why would he leave the candy so far away?" Luke didn't answer. Instead, he turned, looked around the room, and went up to the stroller. When he lifted the part covering the baby, his face turned disturbed. He quickly came back and whispered, "Let's get out of here." Luke started running, and I followed right after, though it was harder because of the heavy bags we were carrying. I was still confused about what he had seen, but then we heard a woman's voice. "Hey, excuse me." It was one of his neighbors. She came running toward us and asked if we knew that man. That's when Luke told her everything, saying that the guy had offered us his leftover candy, but had been pushing a stroller with a fake baby. I remember getting chills down my spine when he said that. The woman replied, "Yeah, that man doesn't have a kid. I saw you guys walking with him." She took us to her car and drove us back to our houses. I know getting into someone else's car after all that was another risky choice. The woman went up to my front door to talk to my mom about what we had just told her. My mom was really upset when I explained all the details of that night. She sent me straight to my room while my parents called the police about that man. My parents never told me what happened afterward. I think they wanted to protect me from knowing more about the case. My mom didn't want me going over to Luke's house anymore, and I know she had a serious conversation with his mom. I still saw Luke occasionally at school, and we were polite to each other, but our friendship was never the same after that. It was Halloween night, back in 2016. My parents had put me in charge of handing out candy to all the kids that came by during the day. My mom, as always, bought a mountain of candy bags, the kind I already knew would last for weeks and that I would inevitably end up eating, even though I was trying to lose a few pounds. I always told her she went overboard with the amount of candy. The house we live in is at the end of a cul-de-sac. Normally, we don't get many kids here. Even so, there was always a loyal group that showed up, knowing that our house was generous with the candy. That year, Halloween fell on a Monday. I was in college, and luckily I didn't have classes on Mondays and Wednesdays that semester. So I took advantage of the morning to go to the gym, and later got ahead on some college work. It was usually around 4 in the afternoon when the noise of the kids started, signaling that the candy hunt had begun. I think the first time the doorbell rang was between 4 and 5 o'clock. The day went as expected. There's not much to tell about handing out candy to kids and my dog Edie going crazy every time someone rang the doorbell. I'd say that, from the first ring until 8 o'clock, I must have answered the door for about 10 or 15 kids at most. Like I said, our cul-de-sac isn't exactly the most convenient place to pass by. Since it was a Monday, things quieted down earlier than usual. I'd say I managed to get a lot of homework done, made progress on my projects, and then had some of the stew my mom had left before going to her room to watch Game of Thrones. I was already on the second episode when I heard the doorbell ring again, unexpectedly. Edie started barking again. I looked at the clock. It must have been around 9:30 at night. That was definitely past the time for trick-or-treaters. I went down to the front door and opened it. On the other side of the glass door, I saw a very tall man dressed as a clown with a pretty scary mask. From his build, you could tell it was a man. He was alone. He waved and pointed to a brown bag he was holding, which seemed almost empty. I didn't open the glass door, I just spoke through it. "Sorry, but we don't have any more candy." I closed the door immediately, locked it right away. The next second, I regretted having opened it. I honestly thought it was just a kid running late, or maybe a parent who worked late and was trying to score one last bit of candy for their kids. But the person on our porch wasn't a kid. They didn't even seem like a teenager. The person was huge, and the clown costume made them look even bigger. Fortunately, I hadn't grabbed the candy bag before opening the door, so he didn't realize I was lying. I stayed near the door for a while, trying to listen if he was walking away, but instead of hearing footsteps, the doorbell rang again. And there was Edie, going frantic again. Edie is a rat terrier. His bark doesn't scare anyone, and he definitely wouldn't defend the house if a stranger tried to get in. I picked him up, turned off the downstairs lights, and went upstairs. It was my awkward attempt to make the guy believe that under no circumstances would I open the door again that night. I put Edie in my room and closed the door to keep him from barking more. Then I stayed at the top of the stairs, just listening. That's when I heard a strange noise, like the glass door was being forced. There was a loud click, as if the latch was giving way. Right after that, I heard knocks on the front door and the doorknob turning. At that moment, I decided it was best to hide in my room. I was totally freaked out. I sent a message to the family group chat, telling them what was happening. Of course, no one replied. I knew that, whoever it was, they'd eventually get tired of waiting. I even thought about messaging my friends to ask if any of them could be behind it, but honestly, all of them were way too short to be the guy at the door. I went back to watching the episode I had paused, trying to pretend he wasn't still there. What else could I do? The doorbell rang again. This was turning into a real nightmare. I kept telling Edie to stay quiet and left the blinds closed. The last thing I wanted was for that clown to know which room I was in. I tried calling my dad, but he didn't pick up. So, I called my brother, who answered, already telling me he wasn't alone. I knew that meant he was with some girl. I told him to check my messages. There's a guy dressed as a clown at the door and he won't leave. My brother just said it was probably a Halloween prank and that I should ignore it. He seemed in a hurry to hang up, so I ended the call. I tried to believe he was right. Honestly, it made more sense for it to just be a prank. After a few more minutes sitting nervously on the edge of my bed, the doorbell finally stopped ringing. I finally felt like I could relax a bit and lay down. I started to fall asleep slowly, turned off the TV to have silence and darkness in the room, and soon after, I fell asleep. I don't think I even had time to fall into a deep sleep, let alone dream, when I woke up to Edie growling softly the way he did when he was waiting for one of us to say everything was okay. I told him to stop, and he obeyed. I looked at where he was staring, the window. I listened closely and noticed a sound coming from outside, like someone was tapping gently. It sounded like something was rubbing against the window. My room was on the second floor. It didn't make sense for someone to be out there, but I started wondering what it could be. I got up and opened the blind to my window, and my God, I was completely wrong. That man dressed as a clown was there, right outside my window. All I could see was that horrifying mask on the other side of the glass. He tilted his head and stared right at me. I screamed with all the strength I had. Edie didn't even bark, or maybe I just blocked everything out around me. I ran with my phone in hand out of the room and straight to my parents' room. I locked the door and dialed 911. I was so shocked I couldn't even cry, just trembling. My voice was shaking as I spoke with the operator. I think I asked her every 20 seconds if the police were arriving quickly. The answer was always the same. They're on their way as fast as they can. The police arrived in about 10 minutes. They checked around the house to see if there were signs of a break-in. All they found was that the front glass door's latch was broken, just as I had suspected. Next to my window, propped against the wall, was my dad's ladder. That man had gone to the tool shed, found the ladder, and used it to climb up to my window. To avoid making the situation even worse, I ended up spending the night at my friend Adam's house. To this day, I have no idea if that was a terribly bad prank planned for Halloween, or if I was about to be the victim of something much worse, with the convenience of it being Halloween. It was the end of October, a Saturday during Halloween weekend. I think that year Halloween fell on a Tuesday, so the big party ended up happening the Saturday before. My friends and I were still on the lookout for something last minute, since everything seemed packed. Our ideal plan was to find a house party. We were all wearing hilarious costumes and really wanted to make the most of them. My friend Isabella decided to post something on her Instagram and Snapchat stories asking about parties that night. I have to admit, it wasn't something I would do. I'd find it a bit cringy and even kind of embarrassing, but I was glad she had the courage. To my surprise, not long after, she sent a message to our group chat saying someone had responded. She sent a screenshot with the details. There were the address, the start time, and a few basic rules like, The party would be indoors only, no backyard, and everyone had to bring their own drinks. There was also a rule that you had to bring at least one girl for every guy. The guy who passed the information to Isabella was someone we knew, our age, who hung out with the same group of friends. Apparently, a lot of people we knew would be there too. The party was in a nearby town, super close. So the four of us decided to head to Luna's house, which was free. We pre-gamed there for about an hour while finishing getting ready. We waited until our friends confirmed they were coming, and as soon as they did, we decided to head out. We ordered an Uber. Each of us brought our own drinks, ranging from 4 Locos to White Claws and a few shots of vodka. I bet the driver was already fed up with us by the end of the ride. When we arrived at the house, we saw a ton of cars parked everywhere. The house was pretty big, with a huge front yard. There were 4 of us girls walking in, so whoever was hosting the party was definitely going to welcome us with open arms. We didn't hear music until we got really close to the door. That's when the bass beat kicked in. When I opened the door, the first room we walked into was a mix of a living room and kitchen. The house had super dim lighting with a bunch of orange lights hanging around, creating that typical Halloween party vibe. The place was packed with people, but honestly, we didn't know anyone. Isabella messaged the guys we knew to see if they had arrived yet. Meanwhile, an older man showed up to greet us. He asked for our names and introduced himself as Evan, Kevin's dad. Apparently, Kevin was the party host. I asked who this Kevin guy was and where he went to school, and his dad said, "Oh, he's around somewhere, you can ask him when you find him." Then he asked if we wanted to put our drinks in the cooler. He took us to the kitchen, where there were 3 big coolers full of ice, each already packed with drinks. So we left some of our cans there. Evan seemed to be in his 50s, which made sense since his son was hosting the party. But at the same time, it was kind of weird how welcoming and involved he was in such a big party happening in his own house. He was walking around, talking to everyone. Well, mostly the girls. He even seemed a little drunk. The 4 of us started playing beer pong at one of the tables, and soon some guys came over to talk to us, so we ended up playing against them. That's when Isabella said our friends were on their way, which made me feel relieved. Suddenly, Evan started yelling my name, and Isabella's from the kitchen counter calling, "Shots!" Our other 2 friends, Luna and Olivia, seemed a bit uncomfortable, so I asked, "Can we all take one?" And he yelled back, "Of course." So we went to the counter with him and we all took a shot of tequila. I gagged a little because there wasn't even a slice of lime. By this point, I was already starting to get tipsy. It was bizarre how the host's dad was trying so hard to hype up the party. He had this weirdly friendly vibe, but it was also kind of unsettling. The unsettling part was how much older he was than everyone there, who were mostly college-aged, and how he kept pushing drinks on people. Then he asked what our poison was. I didn't say anything until I heard the girls mention their favorite drinks. And then Evan started making a bunch of mixed drinks. Meanwhile, we went back to the beer pong table, where the guys we were playing against were still waiting. I took the chance to plug my phone into a nearby outlet since the battery was at about 50%. After that, I went back to the game. Mid-game, Evan showed up with 2 drinks for me and Isabella, and then brought 2 more for Luna and Olivia. They were all in those red plastic cups. He made me a vodka soda. I was sipping on it during the game whenever I had the chance. I was drinking slowly since I was already feeling buzzed. After we lost to the guys, I went to grab my phone and noticed it hadn't charged at all. It was still at the same battery percentage. The outlet wasn't working. I didn't feel comfortable leaving my phone in another outlet, so I decided to save my battery. Our friends finally arrived, and that's when everything started to blur. I mean, really quickly. One minute I was talking to our friend Vincent, and the next, everything went dark. The next thing I remember is being woken up by my friends inside the car, already in front of my house. I felt dizzy, my vision blurry, and my head spinning. We were in one of our friends' cars, and one of the guys helped me get to the front door. After I got inside, they left. I was alone at home except for my parents, who were already asleep in their room. I felt like maybe I had drunk too much, but at the same time, something felt off. The dizziness was unlike any time I'd drunk before. I felt weird. I went straight to my room and lay down to sleep. I grabbed my phone and saw a few messages from an unknown number. When I opened them, I realized there were several already. The first one was a message from me with my name, and the reply was, Evan. Shortly after, he wrote, "You look so beautiful." From the timestamp, that was still during the party. And then, 2 hours later, he sent, "Where did my favorite girls go?" I was shocked to realize I had given him my number. I must have been way more drunk than I thought. Even so, I put my head on the pillow and passed out immediately. The next morning, I woke up to even more disturbing messages. My head was spinning as I read those disgusting texts. After I had fallen asleep, Evan had sent things like, "Where are you? I'm coming to your house. You left something here." And then, "I'm here. Can you come to the door?" Followed by, "Hey, are you awake?" He had even tried calling me 3 times. All of this was around 2 in the morning. I sent screenshots of the messages to my friends, and that's when they reminded me of what had actually happened. Evan was all over me as I became more and more out of it, almost like a zombie. My friends started to get worried, so they pulled me aside and we left the party. As we were leaving, 2 police cars pulled up in front of the house, probably because of a noise complaint. As we were walking out, everyone realized there wasn't any furniture in the house. It was just one big empty space filled with people and beer pong tables. One of our friends managed to track the number somehow and told me it was a VoIP number, something I didn't understand at the time, so he explained that it was basically a fake number Evan had used to send me the messages. He also said that with my number, Evan could easily find out my address. That made me feel even more nauseous. I asked if anyone had actually met the son he mentioned, and everyone said no. We started to suspect that the son didn't even exist. That's when Luna suggested that he might have spiked my drink, and everything started to make sense. I had never felt that way before. We decided to take it to the police. We all went to the nearest station and reported everything, including the messages. The officer at the front desk asked if it had anything to do with the party at the empty house the night before. We were confused at first when he mentioned empty house, until he explained that they had received a report from neighbors about a party happening in a house that had been vacant for some time. We all looked at each other wide-eyed. Shortly after, we were taken to an office where I think it was a detective who took our statement, and we told them everything in detail. He took the fake number and said they would try to track it down as soon as they got a warrant. We gave the police everything we could, and then we went our separate ways. I blocked the number. Honestly, I felt bad about this for a long time. As the days passed and nothing happened, I started to think it was over, but none of us heard anything from the police. We never heard of any arrests or any updates. The thought that this man went to all the effort of advertising a party in a vacant house just to gain access to young people, spike my drink and possibly others, and lie about having a son. It all just proves how dangerous he was. And the fact that we weren't called in to identify anyone gives me chills, thinking that he might still be out there. That was a month ago. I'll update if anything changes, and I'm crossing my fingers that it does. Once I went through a strange situation on Halloween. My cousin came to spend the night with me that year, just so we could go out trick-or-treating. I was 15 at the time, and even though that might seem a bit old for it, let's be real, who doesn't like free candy? Victor, my cousin, was also 15, and our plan was simple. Have a chill night, visit a few houses, and secure a good haul of candy before heading back home. My friend and his younger brother joined us, but at some point we went our separate ways. The street was pretty crowded, with lots of kids running from house to house, all decorated for the occasion. Victor and I decided to knock on the doors of the houses that had their lights on, but where there weren't any kids around. We had already passed by a few undecorated houses, but they were still giving out candy. The funny thing was that the other kids were always at the more decorated houses, like only those were worth it. Because of that, we managed to hit about 4 houses quickly, with no line at all. The next one on our list also didn't have decorations, but the lights were on, so we thought, why not give it a try? We knocked on the door, and as soon as it opened, an older man appeared. He swung the door wide open, and inside there were 5 other men just standing there. They were much younger than the first guy, who must have been around 50, while the others seemed to be in their 30s. The man offered us a bowl of candy, grabbed some, and dropped them into our bags. Then he asked Victor what his name was, and Victor, being smart, gave a fake name. Before the man could continue the conversation, Victor said goodbye and we quickly left. As we walked down the steps, a red flag went off in my head. It seemed like Victor was also feeling weird about it, and we started talking about how bizarre the whole thing was. "Why were there 6 men inside when the door opened?" I asked. "And why were they all acting so strange?" Victor added. These questions wouldn't leave my mind. We were both freaked out by how odd the whole situation had been. We hit 2 more houses before deciding to head back to my place. On the way, we took one last look at that weird house and saw a car pulling out of the garage. The car followed in the same direction we were going and began to slow down next to us. There weren't many people on the street and the kids were all on the sidewalks, so it didn't make sense for the car to be driving so slowly near us. We picked up the pace, and then a second car appeared, moving at the same slow speed as the first. That's when I realized that the driver of the first car was the same guy who had given us candy, and the driver of the second car was one of the other men who had been standing there acting suspiciously. There was also someone in the passenger seat of the first car, but all I could make out was the silhouette of the person. When Victor and I were just 2 houses away from mine, we saw the first car park across the street, right in front of my house. We didn't even have time to see where the second car went, we just ran inside. Our parents were in the living room chatting and they immediately asked what had happened. We told the whole story, and after finishing, we went straight to the window to see if the car was still there. And it was. But about 5 seconds after I looked, it drove off. It had probably been sitting there for about 5 minutes since we went inside. My mom and Victor's mom wanted us to show them where the house with all those men was, but over time our parents calmed us down, saying it was probably just a Halloween prank or something. Even so, I have my own theory about what happened. I think there were 6 men standing at the entrance because, when a lone trick-or-treater or a group of younger kids showed up, they planned to rob or kidnap them. But when they saw that Victor and I were teenagers and about the same size as them, they decided to act like nothing was going on, even with that suspicious behavior. As for why they followed us with the cars, we'll never know. But when the night was over and everyone went to sleep, I realized that house was just a block away from mine.